And today our topic is faith and international community. And I'm delighted to say that we have with us, first of all, Dr. Larry Bell, representing the tradition of Judaism. He is the executive director of the Arizona Jewish Historical Society. And we're meeting in the building that, how would you say it? Does it house your office, or is this a center out of which you do a good deal of your work?
It's right? Both. This is, here.
So, real quick, I'll steal this opportunity. You never miss a chance to promote yourself, right? Where you are, I've not been here. This is the very first synagogue that was built in Phoenix, and our organization has restored the building as a museum gallery and also a venue for events like this. And so it was originally built in 1921. After it was a synagogue, it actually became a Chinese-speaking Baptist church, and then a Spanish-speaking Baptist church, so it's actually a very appropriate place, I think, to have it now.
As you know, hospitality goes way, way, way back in Judaism. So we want to thank you for your hospitality. We also have Dr. Warren Stewart, who is the pastor of the First Institutional Baptist Church here in the city. And he and Dr. Paul Eppinger were major leaders for getting the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday here in the state some years ago. Now, before these two gentlemen speak to us, I know that Paul Eppinger has a few announcements to make because he has a meeting that he has to go to that's going to pull him away from us.
I apologize. My name is Paul Eppinger. I'm the director of the Arizona Division, and have been looking forward to this meeting, especially for months. And of all things, when I got to my office this morning, there was a phone call there that said there's a committee that I'm on that is very, very important for me. It's today, and it started in about 15 minutes, so I am going to have to split. And the only reason I can do that is that Ann and Nancy are here, and they will be taking notes from the speakers and giving me all the details. You are in for an incredible treat, my friends, to have Dr. Bell and Dr. Stewart and Sid, such Jewish, Christian, Muslim persons speaking to this critical issue. So, again, I am very, very sorry that I'll have to leave, but let me lift up that here on the table are a number of things for you. We have an account, a record of different events coming up. One of our major events of the year is our Golden Rule Banquet. For you that have not been here before, we've discovered that the Golden Rule, treat others the way you want to be treated, is in the scripture and the teaching of literally every faith. So we have this Golden Rule Banquet every year. And like last year, we honored the Basha families because the Basha organization, all the Basha supermarkets, 150 supermarkets around the state, they have done so much for civil rights and for human beings. We've honored Dr. Larry Coor, ex-president of ASU. For those of you that are sports fans, we honored Kurt and Brenda Warner. Kurt Warner was the quarterback for the Cardinals. We honored Steve Young, all-pro quarterback, for the work they have done, primarily for street kids. And nobody knows that. But in our research we found them. So we're honoring them. I met somebody on Saturday that we are honoring this year. I could not believe it. When I heard about her first, she is a Navajo woman. And forgive my prejudices, my bias. In my mind, when I think of a Navajo woman, I think of a kind of a squatty, short, older little lady She's a medical doctor at an Indian hospital in South Dakota, also works on the reservation here in Arizona. She was down here for a meeting, and also she ran the Rock and Roll Marathon yesterday. When I met her, we just got invited her. Graduated from U of A, got a master's degree from Yale, then went back to Yale Medical School, and she told me when she was getting her diploma, usually it's Dr. Joe Grove, keep moving, Dr. Mary Smith, keep moving, that sort of thing. When she came up, the president of the school said, I want you to meet Dr. Patricia Nez. I want to stop right here, he said, because she is the first Navajo woman to graduate from Yale Medical School. And for that reason, we are establishing a special scholarship here at the Yale Medical School named after her, the Patricia Nez Scholarship. She is an amazing person, and she'll be here to receive her honor from us on March the 29th. Any of you are still in town, well, some of you are still in town, but if you're here in town, put on your calendar March the 29th. It's going to be at the Mason Convention Center, and it's a great event. But anyway, I'm delighted to welcome all of you here today, and our moderator did not introduce himself, Dr. Tex Sample. Dr. Sample was a professor at a Methodist graduate school for 32 years, has written about a dozen different books, is called on to lecture all over the world. We are incredibly blessed to have Dr. Tex Sample as the moderator for this meeting today. So with that, I have to say goodbye to you. Thank you for coming, and we have a number of announcements for you to see on our internet and things. Be sure and put down your name and your email address and things so we can contact you, or you can contact us to see some of the different things. One thing that's happening is a walk for values this Saturday, and there's going to be 600 or 800 people walking for values of love and peace and compassion, etc. And you can get that information from our website. So thank you all for being here, and Tex, thank you, and for Larry and Warren. Warren and I, can you imagine? Both of us from Kansas, both of us Baptists. We are brothers. I mean, if you look at the blood, we're right there together. And besides this, Friday night, Warren spoke at the Martin Luther King event that I was emceeing in Mesa. We were getting everything on Saturday. We were in the Martin Luther King March yesterday. So almost step for step. We've been together for like 4 or 5 days. Tex, thank you.
Thank you, Paul. We thought, Dr. Paul suggested that we take these folks and start the order. Since Judaism is the oldest faith tradition we'll have here this morning, we thought we would start with Dr. Bell. We've asked each one of them to do 2 minutes each, 10 minutes each. And then we'll go over for questions. But once we get the questions and comments, then the flow of the conversation will move, of course, between our guests quite quickly. We won't recognize any particular order. Dr. Bell, thank you so much for being here.
Well, I'm glad I have more than 2 minutes. I like to tell people in my former life I used to be a college professor, so that can go on and on. But I will try and keep this fairly short. I'll start off with a little qualification, I guess, in that I am not a theologian. presentation is going to be perhaps more historically based about Judaism and international conflict. But if you know a bit about Judaism, you'll know that it's actually a very historical religion. And so a lot of what informs Jewish identity and practice and so forth is really very historical in nature. So I don't see a conflict in that. So, the other thing about Judaism that I think is very distinctive on this topic is that, and it's going to make us probably a bit different from Christianity and Islam, is that for the better part of the last 19 centuries, Jews have not had political sovereignty as Jews, and so therefore issues of war and conflict, we have it way back in our history in ancient times, but once you get out of ancient times, we have essentially been fairly powerless in this realm. And so a lot of the, what would you say, the kind of theological questions I think that other religions have approached us from don't necessarily fall into Judaism as much, because war and conflict and diplomacy were things that we were really in a position to practice. However, it didn't start off that way. Certainly in ancient times, Jews pretty much conducted diplomacy, warfare, conquest, defense, so forth, military matters, pretty much like anybody else. Obviously in the Davidic, Solomon kingdoms in ancient times, from roughly the year 1000 BC or BCE to about to the year 586 BC or BCE, depending on which terminology you use, when they were conquered by the Babylonians, Jews practiced this kind of thing just about like everybody else. However, what happened is when they were conquered by the Babylonians and their temple destroyed and their kingdom overrun and their sovereignty lost, Jews had to sort of find a way to interpret international conflict that was a little different than everybody else and to explain their defeat. Why should you continue to remain as Jews if you have been defeated? You know, in ancient times, in polytheistic societies, when you fight a war, or in societies where everybody has their own god, when you fight a war and you lose, that means the other person's god is more powerful than yours, and therefore they defeat you. And so a lot of what Judaism did, really a kind of revolutionary thought process, was monotheism. The same God controls us and our enemies. The same God is over everybody. And so therefore you can, in a way, explain your defeats through a belief in one God that's universal, that is both the master of your own people and also of your enemies. And so there is a tradition in Judaism to explain the results of conflicts in this way divinely. Victory being that God is blessed and bless the Jewish people, and defeat in some ways as a retribution or as evidence that God is somehow unhappy with what the Jews are doing. And so this arises in ancient times, and you'll see that it actually will continue to the present. There is this belief. The other thing that happens in ancient times is that because Jews, okay, so the Jews are conquered by the Babylonians. There's Sid. Here, Sid, you can sit here. Because Jews are conquered by the Babylonians, okay, and their temples destroyed, it turns out that the Persian Empire winds up conquering the Babylonians and allows the Jews to return to the land of Israel, rebuild their temple, and so forth. And so what happens, though, is that the Jews are not really politically sovereign anymore. They're subjects of the Persian Empire after that. And so in Judaism, there develops a tradition of splitting political sovereignty from religious beliefs and practices. And so, again, this stems way back from ancient times. If you know about Jewish history from the Second Temple period, Jews developed this practice. Jews will accept foreign political domination, but they will not accept foreign religious practice. So whoever rules the Jews can rule the Jews, and the Jews will conduct themselves as subjects of that people. But the minute that that ruler tries to tell the Jews how to practice religion, that's cause for conflict. Okay? So those are two very important things that come out of ancient times in terms of Jewish religious practice and conflict. The Maccabee Rebellion, right? The holiday of Hanukkah. That didn't start necessarily over a political dispute with the Greek rulers of the land of Israel. It started over a religious dispute. The Greeks started telling the Jews what they had to do in their temple, and that produced a rebellion. The same with the Romans. The Jews rebelled from Rome in large measure because not because the Romans ruled them, they had lived under Roman rule for quite some time before the rebellion. but because the Romans start telling them about their religion, and that produces a rebellion. So that's sort of from ancient times what you can take away. The Roman rebellion, which ends in 70, the year 70 of the Common Era, or 70 AD, again produces a destruction of the temple. And this time, the Romans exile the Jews from the land of Israel. And so for the next 19 centuries, like I was saying, the Jews not only are deprived of political sovereignty, they don't have a homeland anymore either, and so they have to live in exile in the lands of other people. As not only as subjects, but without even their own homeland people. So this means, like I say, that war and international conflict kind of fade away from the primary issues of Judaism. And it also produces an interesting response to these things, because Jews really don't have any power to affect this during the exile period. Essentially, throughout this period, there's periodic persecutions of Jews, but Jews don't have armies to marshal and defend themselves, and so they tend to turn inward in terms of the conflict, and to try and develop spiritual solutions to sort of real-world political and military problems. One solution they develop is that this persecutions of Jews will eventually be resolved by a messianic redemption. And so that they develop an idea that their condition of exile, if they endure it enough, eventually a Messiah will emerge and will redeem them and lead them back to the land of Israel and restore the Jewish people. So this becomes a very widely and commonly accepted thing in Judaism, to the extent that Jews accept their condition in exile with this thought that eventually the Messiah will come. The second thing is that the biggest act of violence against Jews during this period was actually during the Crusades, when the Crusaders went off to fight the Holy War against the Muslims and liberate the land of Israel, Jerusalem, and so forth, against the Muslims. The first thing they did before they left Europe was to massacre Jewish communities that were in Europe, and considering them kind of the enemy within, they would go off and fight someone else. And the Jewish response to the Crusades was rather interesting and severe. The Jews had no power to fight the Crusaders. And so rather than submit to this forced Christian slaughter and baptism and be forced to accept Christianity or die, the Jews actually killed themselves. And they did so in a fairly very heroic kind of fashion. So the Jewish holy warrior, in effect, becomes this person who is willing to commit suicide rather than accept foreign religious domination, because they had no military outlet to fight the Crusaders. So that's essentially the medieval period. Okay? So going into modern times, it's really in the modern period that everything starts to change. Because it's ironic that for a people that had no real influence over war and conflict for so many years, so much of it today seems to involve us right now. So it's really in modern times where some of these older concepts get picked up again and resuscitated, I guess. The modern period has three major impacts on Judaism, on the Jewish people, on Jewish identity. One had to do with the emancipation of the Jews in Europe, and I would call it the integration of Jews into Western society. That's the first thing. The second is the Holocaust, which had a complete enormous impact on Judaism. And the third was the reestablishment of the state of Israel after 1900 years or more. So these are the three things in modern time that start to affect things. Emancipation. One, when Europe experiences the Enlightenment, and you have the creation of modern science and modern scientific ideals and modern notions of citizenship, Jews, all of a sudden, after all this time, are welcome now to participate in the societies in which they live. They're not exiles in those societies anymore. And so Jews actually start to get involved in conflict, in wars and things, through the societies they live in. So, to keep the story short, I have 10 minutes, I'll give you an example. During the First World War, Jews fought in every single army that was engaged in the First World War against each other. They fought for the countries that they lived in. In many ways, that goes back to what I just said. Jews will accept foreign political rule. And so integration into a surrounding society is not an alien concept to Judaism, to be part of politically of a society as long as religious practice is kept separate. And Jews have become political leaders of countries, and I would say certainly today, this pattern of Jewish approach to conflict is most evident in the United States, where I would say that Jews have entered the political system, they've served in the military, they've been very well integrated in the United States. So, the second thing that affects Judaism and conflict in modern times is the Holocaust, because just as Jews start to feel very comfortable in these societies that they live, you have this genocide which wipes out 1/3 of all the Jewish people in the world and 2/3 of the Jews that live in Europe. That defies that idea that Jews can be equal citizens. And so, because of the Holocaust, Jews have two reactions to it. Aside from the fact that it tends to put some doubts into the integration idea, it doesn't kill it off, but it does allow some doubt. It also, Jews have sort of a twofold reaction. One, on the one hand, they become much more aware of the suffering of other people. And so if you look internationally at the movements to help refugees, to help the persecuted, you'll always find Jewish people very, very involved in those movements. Because we know what that experience is like. On the other hand, it has led Jews to become more militaristic as well. Because, if anything, the Holocaust revealed what happens to you when you don't have your own military power. You really cannot stop that kind of persecution. Okay? I mean, it's nice to work for refugees and stuff, but it didn't really save the Jews during the Holocaust. Okay? So, you can't just rely on other people's goodwill. So, that leads us to number 3, which is the reestablishment of the State of Israel, which today has become sort of the center of views of Judaism and international conflict. The Holocaust, Israel, is the result of a movement, political movement called Zionism, okay, which began before the Holocaust. So these ideas were actually circulating in the 19th century rather than the 20th. But the Holocaust made it very, very acute that what the Zionists were doing to be accomplished. Okay, so Zionism, interestingly enough, you see, the old Jewish view of sovereignty from the Middle Ages, like I say, was that the Jews are in exile, and that only when the Messiah appears, when God decides the time is right, they will be redeemed. Zionism, in many ways, had to fight against the Jewish religion to create a Jewish state, because the Zionists rejected that principle. The Zionists said, we don't want to wait for God anymore. We're going to help ourselves. Only Jews can liberate Jews, right? And so Zionism in its origin, and in the early years of the State of Israel, was actually a very secular movement, a very pragmatic movement, and not religious. If anything, more of its ideology was derived from socialism than it was from religion. Okay. 1967, the State of Israel wins the most tremendous victory you can imagine. In 6 days, they defeat virtually all of the Arab armies in the Middle East combined in a complete rout. All of a sudden, the religious Jews, the Orthodox religious Jews, who in large measure were opposed to Zionism at the beginning, because they said you have to wait for the Messiah. Remember back in ancient times, God rules everybody. When you win in a war, that's a sign of God's favor. They became convinced that this victory, in large measure, was a kind of endorsement of the State of Israel religiously, and became part, really, of Zionism after that point. They developed, and this is worth going into a little bit, because some of the current conflict in the Middle East drives this. They developed, the Orthodox religious Jews, a philosophy of Zionism, because, see, they still had this issue of the Messianic redemption, which they were not rejecting yet. So they said the mission of the Orthodox, of the religious Jews, is to prepare the land of Israel for the Messianic redemption, to kind of purify the society. 2 minutes? Okay. So they say, we're going to make sure that Jews in Israel practice Judaism traditionally. We're going to redeem parts of the land that were not in Jewish hands before, to reclaim them in the language of the opposition to occupy that, right? Abraham Isaac Cook was the name of the rabbi who kind of began this philosophy, and it really underlies what you would call the settler movement in Israel. Okay? And so, I guess I would say the irony today is that the Zionists who started out with the original philosophy, which was somewhat anti-religious, tend to be in the peace camp in Israel. And the more religious Jews who were originally opposed in general to the state of Israel, not all of them, but most of them, tend to be in the more conflict-based camp now. So it's kind of reversed. And knowing that I'm running out of time, I'll add this last thought, which is, when I look out and I see people who are trying to understand this conflict, I think one of the problems that people have in the international setting to try and resolve this is they don't understand the depth of it. And I don't know if you would agree with me or not, but certainly from the Jewish side, you cannot reduce this conflict to a simple battle over territory between the Israelis and the Arabs or the Palestinians or whomever you're talking about. And you cannot reduce it. Worse yet, I would think, would be to sort of reduce it to a sense of colonial domination of one people over another. I don't think that really explains it from the Jewish side. How you feel about Israel is based on how you define yourself as a Jew. And so it's a much deeper thing among Jews. The issue of Israel is not just about this territory or that territory or a wall here or a wall there. It's about who you are. For example, do you think that Israel is the culmination of your religion? The modern state of Israel is a culmination of your thousands of years of history of religion? Or is it a rejection of it, a liberation from it? I mean, these are important questions, and if you just reduce this to a territorial dispute, you're really missing the whole dimension that I think most Jews are discussing. So I think I'll leave it at that, and I'm sure if you have questions, you can ask.
Next, we turn to Dr. Warren Stewart.
Panelists, I thank God for his absence for asking me to come and share the Christian perspective on faith and international conflict. Let me say at the outset, I will share my Christian perspective. I can here not speak for all Christians, so I will share my particular perspective. Mahalia Jackson, the late gospel singer, had a song that I remember singing. He's got the whole world in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands. And from a Christian perspective, that would be our point of departure, because most Christians believe that God is creator, sustainer, and sovereign over all. And then most Christians believe that Jesus Christ is God's Son, and that He is also sovereign and the role model for par excellence for peace, for reconciliation, and for nonviolence. Let me share some words I shared in a previous presentation similar to this, related to peace and nonviolence. It dealt with Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., whose birthday we are still celebrating, and of course Jesus Christ. Mahatma Gandhi, in his search for truth, believed that truth could only be known through tolerance and concern for our fellow humanity. In his pursuit for peace in his homeland of India, overruled by the British Empire, Gandhi developed a method of social action based on principles of courage, nonviolence, and truth that ultimately led to the freedom of hundreds of millions of Indians from violent oppression by the British colonial government. Martin Luther King Jr. in America, in another generation, yet in a similar context of legal and illegal violence spawned by racism, prejudice, hatred, bigotry, irrationality, and ignorance, he embarked on his own search for truth, influenced by Jesus Christ and Mahatma Gandhi. On nonviolence, King said nonviolence means avoiding not only external physical violence, but also internal violence of spirit. You not only refuse to shoot a man, you refuse to hate him. He went on to say the nonviolent approach does something to the hearts and souls of those committed to it. It gives them new self-respect. It calls up resources of strength and courage that they did not know that they had. Finally, it so stirs the conscience of the opponent that reconciliation becomes a reality. Dr. King said, it is no longer the choice between violence and nonviolence. It is either nonviolence or non-existence. Jesus Christ showed us the way, and Mahatma Gandhi showed us it could work. That was Dr. Martin Luther King. So I say to us that both Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King, when sensing that violence had gotten personal, led millions of people to make peace personal. Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace and Lord of Lords, taught us in the Sermon on the Mount the words from Matthew 5:9, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Jesus here is calling all of us who live in a violence-prone, violence-torn world like he did 2,000 years ago, to make peace. Moreover, the King of Peace calls us to make bringing people into harmony with God and one another a priority. New Testament scholar William Barclay commented, Christ's blessing is on the peacemakers, not necessarily the peace lovers. It is one thing to hope and desire for peace. It's quite another to make for peace. And Mahatma Gandhi, Martin King, and Jesus Christ were all personal peacemakers who changed our world for the better. They are our role models for making peace. And how ironic that each of them who made peace died violently. Note that Jesus calls peacemakers children of God. And so making peace causes us to be children of God. I want to shift now, since I've done a perspective from Jesus Christ, Martin King, and Mahatma Gandhi. I want to shift and read from this journal here. It's Faith and International Affairs Journal. It is the fall 2008 issue. And the subject of the article is Religion and Security in a Postmodern World by Dr. Stephen E. Meyer, Professor of Political Science and National Security at the Industrial College of the Armed Forces. I want you to hear what he says about faith and conflict and security. Just as the rebirth of religion needs to be understood in the context of time and place, the definition of security and its relationship to religion cannot be understood without having a grasp on the world that is emerging in the early years of the 21st century. In the fading modern world, the Westphalian state system overwhelmingly has defined security and controlled the instruments of security. In fact, for the past 500 years, for their own self-interest, proclaimed and codified in practice and in international law, the reality that they and they alone controlled all legitimate instruments of security, especially instruments of force and violence. In that context, as the international system gradually shared pre-modern modes of conduct, the state came to dominate and often control religious organizations in the political and security realm. But as the world system changes from the modern to the postmodern, the concept of security and its relationship to religion needs to change. Traditional national security has been overtaken by the movement of history. Security today is something much more robust than defense. In the world of religion, a broader, more inclusive understanding of security points to two basic considerations. First, our concept of security today needs to reflect the structure and dynamic of this more complex matrix globalizing world. This means that while security certainly must continue to encompass the welfare and defense of the state, it must also, this is key, include non-state actors, including individuals. Often described as human security, this more holistic concept of security encompasses much more than the use of traditional military and state-centric diplomatic tools. Sooner rather than later, religious organizations will have to be considered among those non-state actors that become part of the new global order. This is from a military professor. It must become part of the new global order. In particular, international law and practice eventually will need to recognize religion as the basis for the existence of organizations that are equal to states in the global system. Second, in the future, security at the global level needs to protect and defend the practice of religion and all responsible activities of religious organizations. In other words, in a much more institutionally complex world in which religion is playing a more prominent role, and all responsible activities, a more complex role in which religion is playing a more complex, prominent role, means and mechanisms need to be found to ensure that the freedom of religious practice is guaranteed by groups and individuals alike. Every effort needs to be pursued in the emerging order to ensure freedom of religion, both within and across state, commercial, institutional, and geographical boundaries. At the same time, the reverse is required. It will be necessary in the new environment to ensure the religious practice and religious organizations do not damage, threaten, or eliminate the right of other individuals or organizations from practicing their own religious conviction. Final paragraph, and I'm through. If security is to take on needed new dimensions in the 21st century, it must incorporate in its mission and mechanisms the protection and promotion of responsible religious liberty. That means that in the future, security must involve the right and the obligation of religion to participate in programs and organizations to promote the health and welfare of the world's citizens on an equal footing with political, commercial, geographic, and other organizations in the cooperative environment. I began with a song out of the African American Christian Experience. He got the whole world in his hand. So I conclude with a song from the African American Christian Experience. It's a contemporary praise song entitled, I Need You to Survive. Here's the song's message. I need you. You need me. We're all a part of God's body. Stand with me. Agree with me. We are all a part of God's body. It is His will that every need be supplied. You are important to me. I need you to survive. I pray for you. You pray for me. I need you to survive. I won't harm you with words from my mouth. I love you. I need you to survive. It is His will that every need be supplied. You are important to me. I need you to survive.
Our third speaker today is Mr. Sid Shaheed. He's a businessman here in Phoenix, and he's also a member of the board of the Arizona Interfaith Movement. Mr. Shaheed.
Hello. Well, a lie is a very poor way to say hello, so I have to tell you the truth. The reason why I'm dressed the way I am is that I was this morning at an Indian reservation, and as part of being working with the federal government, we try to dress a bit more modestly when we go to Indian reservations. Secondly, I just got a new phone and had a meltdown, and I completely forgot about this event. Fortunately, I've been looking so forward to it that in my mind I've been preparing for it for a very long time. And my mentor, my colleague, my best friend, and Taylor called me and said, Sid, where are you? And I'm like, oh my God. I dropped everything in my office. I got in my car from my work only 2 blocks from here, so here I am. So that's the truth. In any case, I'm very, very glad to be here. You know what? I've been looking so forward to talking to you all about international conflict and religion. It happens to be a personal interest of mine. My degrees are in international relations, political science and history. And I've written extensively about international conflict. My grandparents from India, so I respect Mahatma Gandhi, and I certainly understand a lot of different flashpoints that are happening right now. And the way I really thought about couching this talk of ours today is really to talk more about contemporary stuff. Because let's face it, that's really what's on our mind. What the heck is going on with the Muslim world today? You know, why are all this conflict? Why all this this sort of angst? Bringing out things about the faith that some people understand, some people don't understand, some people, wonder what they are, and even us moderate Muslims are befuddled about, what the heck it is that's going on. My entire life has been dedicated as a moderate Muslim to take the mantle of my faith away from those who basically hijacked it. Because let's face it, almost a quarter of mankind is Muslim. Not quite, but almost. And if every Muslim was a terrorist or an extremist or someone who wished to harm other people, this world would have perished a long time ago. Well, obviously that's not the case. But we have to explore why is it, that when we look at international conflict, Islam is sort of at the crux of it, and there's so many things that are going on that makes you wonder, hey, is it the religion, or is it the people, or is it the geopolitics? What is it? I have to think back to about 2 months ago. I was making a presentation at Phoenix College, and this young lady raised her hand and she said, "Sir, I want to ask you one question." I said, "Please." And she said, "What is it that you like most about your religion, and what is it that you like least?" And I said, "Well, that's a good question." So I said, "Well, I kind of like my faith. I always tell my children, if your faith can't answer any questions or any conflicts that you have, then you probably are not following the right faith. So within the context of my faith, I can answer those questions." And so that's I really like my faith very much. I said, "Oh, okay. And what is it that you like the least?" And I said, Well, as someone who practices Islam, I think I like Muslims the least because we have certain elements within our faith that really have not presented our faith in a way that should be presented. So what I'm going to talk to you about, I'm going to give you one basic element of, actually I'm going to quote the Holy Quran, which is our holy book. It's the verse is contained in chapter 69, I think verses number 103. But it talks about, and understand that the Quran is actually us Muslims consider the Quran to be the actual word of God. And it says, "O people, we created you as nations and tribes, so you may love each other and not despise each other." Folks, the fact of the matter is, this particular verse has somehow not made the impact that it needs to make. I think this is the most important, sort of verse from a religious perspective that within international conflict we need to consider. Now, when we look at flashpoints, for example, we look at what's happening in Afghanistan today, the Taliban, that sort of thing. We look at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict with rampant terrorism, going on, in terms of Hamas, Hezbollah, that sort of thing. I mean, we can't, you can call it many different things, but there's a way to settle situations, and you have to call the cat black sometimes. And you look at places like Somalia, where in the name of religion, so many things are being done that are really not even human, much less religious. And that's coming from a Muslim. So in that sense, we have to understand that the extremism that has sort of pervaded international conflict flashpoints. For example, Taliban, you look at what they're doing in terms of they're killing each other, they're killing other Muslims, they're killing other non-Muslims, all in the face, in their view that, our land is being invaded by foreigners and basically we need to go ahead and do something and expel these foreigners. And basically, their level of corruption is probably the highest among all. You see the way they treat little girls, throwing acid on them when they're trying to study. I mean, is that faith? That's not my faith. That's not the faith that I was believed to be in. Show me anywhere in the Quran that says that, women should be subjected to that sort of stuff. It's really not there. And then you look at the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and my dear friend, Dr. Bell, I have to take up where he left off. He said that the way you view Israel, or the way you view this conflict, is how you define yourself as a Jew. Well, I would say you view this conflict as to how you define yourself as a Muslim. Do you define yourself as a Muslim to say you are on the table of humanity with your brothers, the Jewish people, with your brothers, the Christian people, or the Buddhist people, or the Hindu people? And that's how you have to look at international conflict. I think that is how God intended us as nations, as tribes, to come together and to honor each other, not despise each other, which is in my holy book, folks. And that is what sort of goes away. I think Muslims have a great lesson to learn from the Jewish people. And I was so glad to, I was reading an article, and I don't remember the exact town, but I believe it was the Israeli President Shimon Peres, who actually criticized the extremist Jewish people when they were spitting on women who were asking for, dressed a different way, or something like, please correct me if I'm wrong. My goodness, why can't the Muslim leaders yell at the Taliban for doing what they're doing? Like I'm doing. I mean, geopolitics aside, but, certain principles pervade, and why cannot we learn from our Jewish brothers? I mean, I would trust my life in the hands of this man. I mean, I know him well, we don't know each other very well, but I know he's a good person. And I wish more Muslims had that sort of an attitude. A lot of them do, the majority of them do, but we need to take this level to a whole different level and say, hey, look, our faith has been hijacked. It is incumbent upon the Muslims, most of all, first of all, to sort of take the mantle of their faith back away from the extremists and actually do something to, and I think it should be unilateral. When we talk about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, hey, how much have Arabs themselves, the countries around, Israel, have done for the Palestinians? Well, Palestinians are sort of kind of persona non grata in many of the Arab countries. And I'm not saying that they should be discounted into the ash heap of history or people. Not at all. I mean, they deserve rights. They deserve freedoms like every person does in this world. And they deserve a place to live like every person does in this world. But we can't look at conflicts like this as a zero-sum game. That the gain of Palestinians cannot come unless destruction of Israel comes, or vice versa. This world will only survive if we learn to play nice, and if we learn to play with each other. And as such, why can't our relationship, and it's incumbent upon the leaders, it's incumbent upon the moderates among us, and it's incumbent upon people like me who walk in here. Excuse my appearance. I'm not going to Hawaii yet. I just want to it's incumbent upon people like us to come out and say, folks, this is not right. I mean, I have read the Quran many times. I have read it in translation. I have read it in different sort of aspects. And I can explain many things in the Quran, and I'm no expert. But I feel that I have sufficient knowledge to explain a lot of different things. Yet, you see in places like Somalia, in places like Afghanistan, in places like despondent areas of the Middle East, often religion is used among populations that are despondent, that are populations that are uneducated, the populations that are not as polished as you and I, to motivate them to do things, to go kill themselves as suicide bombers and do things that are obnoxious and inappropriate and things that are not even sanctioned within any faith doctrine. So this is our challenge, I think, that is the challenge, I think, of my generation to resolve this and to fix this. Funny, I'll conclude with my daughter. Actually, we were having a discussion about, she's 18 years old, she's just graduating from high school and going off to college. She got a full ride at U of A and ASU, but naturally she doesn't want to go there. so we're waiting to hear from some East Coast universities, so if you see me standing with a little cardboard thing on the street saying, kid going to college needs money, you'll know what that is. So she said, Dad, don't worry about it. Just don't worry about it. Our generation will fix it. We're tired of this conflict. Our generation will fix it. And I think it's so important that we impart that upon our young people. That, it's just so important. Dr. Stewart spoke of the youth in a very eloquent presentation that he did a couple of days ago. While Dr. King and I had the privilege of being there as well. That is where the challenge lies, folks. Dr. Bell just spoke about how you recognize yourself as a Jewish person or as a Muslim. That is where the challenge lies, within us to make that difference. So with that, I will conclude. I welcome any of your questions, and I thank you for listening to me, and I apologize for my appearance and for being a little late. Thank you.
Because of that part of our program where we have questions and comments from you. So I think we've got a question right here, or a comment on the front row.
Well, actually, rather a long comment because
Not too long, but
I'll try. First of all, not use the mics. First of all, if every Muslim were like Dr. Shadi,
I'm just Sid.
all right, Sid. If every Muslim were like Sid, there would be no conflict in Israel. However, Dr. Bell misstated some facts. You did your homework up to a point, but you did it from a very leftist view. And to blame the right wing in Israel for the conflict that's going on there is a grievous mistake and a grievous error, and certainly not true. I've had a lot of contact with the secular and the religious world in Israel, and all of them want peace. Now, the parameters for peace are recognize Israel, and we'll do what we can to accommodate. They gave away Gaza. They forcibly removed people from Gaza. You blame the settlers. The settlers are not to blame. The government of Israel encouraged settlement in land that was theirs from time immemorial. You left out that even during the times of exile, there were still Jews left behind. So there has been a continuous Jewish presence there from the time of Joshua.
I think we're going to stop there. Let's get a response from you. Dr. Bell, would you like to respond?
My intention was never to blame the conflict in Israel upon right-wing Jews. So just clarify that, let's get that out there. What I was trying to do is give you a longer view of this conflict from a Jewish perspective of Jewish history and the evolution of the religion. So if I came across as blaming one particular party for the conflict in the Middle East, I apologize for that. That's not my intention. What I was trying to explain with the settler movement, though, is that its origins come from the ideology of Rabbi Abraham Isaac Kook, which is this concept. See, the Orthodox Jews have a theological problem if you believe that the Messianic redemption is necessary to create a political state in Israel. And that problem is resolved. This is sort of what I was trying to explain, not so much with the details of the conflict with the Palestinians, but the way to resolve that theologically is that the Jews who are religious, if they, in a sense, purify the land and the society and make the society more observant of the Jewish religion, they are in effect preparing the groundway for the Messiah. And that is what that ideology states. Now, in terms of assessing the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, that was not something I intended to go into too much in detail. So, in any event, I'll leave it at that.
But there is no Orthodox Jew other than a very, very extreme right wing who I've ever heard say anything about preparing the land for Messianic redemption.
All right, let's take a comment. Are there other comments, questions? I don't know which hand is up next. Do you have a comment?
Not to that particular topic, but I have my own.
I think we move around.
Oh, okay, thank you very much. Sid, I'd like to return to the concept that you put forth here, essentially that you as a moderate Muslim and other moderate Muslims want to wrest the mantle of your religion from the so-called extremists. There's a conceptual problem here. And the fact is that this extremism is in fact, as Irshad Manvi said, mainstream in Islam because it comes straight out of the Quran. The Quran contains dozens of commandments to make war on non-Muslims. Your Prophet Muhammad said the same thing. And also the most respected Islamic religious authorities in the world say the same thing. For example, Yusuf Qaradawi, who you're obviously familiar with, he is by far the most respected and influential Islamic religious authority in the world today with hundreds of millions of followers. He's the spiritual leader of the Muslim Brotherhood. He said, quote, "There can be no peace between us and non-Muslims because that is what Allah said, that is what our Holy Quran said," unquote. So the source of this conflict in Islam, and I have quotes here, but you don't have time to listen to them all, from the Quran, from Muhammad, and from these respected Islamic religious authorities, they say that there can be no peace between Muslims and non-Muslims because that is what Allah says.
Let's give him a chance to respond.
Sure.
Well, I just respectfully disagree with Mr. Qaradawi, and as many modern Muslims do as well. I think we are falling into the sort of the trap of saying that Islam preaches violence against non-Muslims. I think that's a historical question. I think it's something that should be relegated to history. You have to realize that Islam in itself has never undergone reformation like other faiths have. It's us modern Muslims who are trying to define our faith, like I said, define our faith in a way that clears up some of those misconceptions. I have read the Quran many times. I've read some of those passages, and I would venture to say that some of those passages are not for all time. And that is one of the biggest mistakes that the extremists would have you believe. In fact, that is the best way that the extremists manipulate the uneducated and the despondent, saying like, oh look, we're supposed to fight the non-Muslims forever, when that particular verse may have come about a conflict that involved 313 Muslims against 1,000 non-Muslims, and it was about the survival of a particular faith. So all I say is, let history be history, and let's not let people like Qaradawi tell us what our faith should be or what we should do. As far as the Muslim Brotherhood is concerned, There are many moderate Muslims that would have nothing to do with the Muslim Brotherhood. I would venture to say that the Muslim Brotherhood, if you bring it, if somebody identifies themselves here in the United States as a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, I would say that they would be very easily discredited, because I really don't think that that is something, that is not the type of path that moderate Muslims need to take. I think the path that we need to take is a path that goes beyond promoting views that are sort of confined and say, well, this cannot change because this is what your holy book says. Well, then why me as a Muslim who loves his faith and many others like me are saying, no, this is not okay. We cannot have this. Non-Muslims and Muslims should be treated equally. I do not believe in taking away strength or taking away rights or taxing non-Muslims. That is wrong. I don't care what happened in the past, but that is not appropriate in today. And allow us this opportunity to work towards reformation of our faith. Allow us the opportunity to correct and to interpret things in a proper way, so that we can move beyond this. Well, it's our choice. Either we could be stuck in the dungeons of primitive thought, or we could rise above and get beyond them.
All right.
Make this one quick response to that.
Let's go to Smothers. There was a lady here that was trying to get in. Do you have a question any longer? How about here, and then we'll come to you next. All right. Please, sir.
To argue about what two people have said this morning would be like arguing against God, motherhood, and the zipper. I am surprised that you did not say something about economics. And by the way, the Muslims don't have a corner on being critical. All you have to do is listen to the Christians in South Carolina.
The Gideon Bible, a violent book.
Sure.
Very violent book.
Sir, why don't you make...
Now, my point is this.
Yes, please.
If we can get ourselves all together to solve some major economic problems, we have 2,300 children dying every day from starvation. We have 4 children out of 10 in the United States that are homeless. Now, if we can get together and look at the economic factors that's involved and unite, and then look at the super political parties that can collect millions of dollars. They don't have to register the companies that are doing it, and these are the problems that are going to have to be solved before we have
Let's give him a
peace.
chance to respond. You want to respond to that?
I don't know if I can respond to that, but I do know that economic issues often cause us to be in conflict with one another, whether it's nations, whether it's political parties, whether it's different classes of people, whether it is even different religious groups in America or elsewhere. When people are deprived of the basics to live, that creates conflict within them, and then often to survive or to defend themselves, that in turn creates conflict with others. So I would agree with you that the whole thing, of a third of Jesus' sayings dealt with materialism. And how, if you're going to be a follower of Jesus Christ, that you must reorder your priorities economically. So I agree with you.
Any other comments from our other two? Yes?
I think we hit the nail on the head. I think there needs to be more goodness in this world, and I think we really need to focus on people who don't have as much as we do. I went to India 3 years ago, my wife and my 2 kids. And here are my kids, with their iPods and all this stuff, and all of a sudden, seeing there was a little child, younger than my child, 3 years old, followed us around, half